Alright YouTube, Casey here. With Pokémon Day right around the corner as of time of this recording, I thought it'd be a great chance to talk about why Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl should be the last remakes, and how Black and White 3 are a perfect point to get back to the sequels that were originally introduced with Black and White 2. Because, let's call a spade here, BDSP had a mixed reception, with the art style and the lack of new content really not garnering too much goodwill from the wider community. It would be a great point to cut off with the remakes and go back to more original games. And not just that point, but a whole lot of others speak in favor of Black and White 3 because there's a lot of story left to be told in Unova. With the elephant in the room being the original Kyurem form. A Pokemon that's been alluded to in the first games and further expanded upon in the Black and White 2 sequels. After well over a decade of speculation, it would just be so cool to see a Pokemon that's been speculated about for well over a decade at this point, and honestly, that alone would completely justify a sequel in my book, because I just really want to see it. But even then, as cool as Kyurem is, there's another Pokemon that has been also established to have an original yet unseen form from the Unova decks, and that is the mythical Pokemon Genesect. Said to have been a Pokemon that roamed the Earth millions of years ago, and having been revived and upgraded by Team Plasma with the Steel and the Cannon, it'll be quite fascinating to see in a Primal Reversion style Primal Genesect, much like Groudon and Kyogre in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, and maybe even see if those upgrades were upgrades at all. But those two would just be the Pokemon side of things. What I'm also rather invested in is the human NPC side of things, because our player character from the first games has been severely missing in the sequels, having said to been looking for an while the events of Black and White 2 are going on, and nowhere to be seen in those games at all. So a reunion of those characters and a nice little end to that arc would make a whole lot of sense, and especially if you want this complete Kyurem form, it would make even more sense to have those characters return to Unova in a potential trilogy to make the complete Kyurem. And even then, that is not the only one, because the more recent example would be actually from the Pokemon Legends Arceus with Ingo. In a game that has been all about establishing ancestry to already established characters, having a already known character also being ripped into this timeline alongside our player character that is from the Unova region always felt like a very conscious choice to me, and it would make so much sense, and it would be such a great payoff for the setup of having the new player character interact with especially his brother and see how his presumably sudden disappearance would impact those people around him. So those are like the main points where it's like a lot of story to explore and really interesting to see. But there's another huge point that the Unova games represent for me, and that is the art style. Pokemon Black and White and Black and White 2 were the last games to have the classic sprites and 2D artworks before switching to the 3DS era. And I will never make a secret out of it, I am extremely fond. To this very day, the trainer and Pokemon sprites from the Gen 5 games are my absolute favorites. And now seems like a great time to return to this, because with games like Octopath Traveler, Triangle Strategy, Live Alive, there's just been proven that a 2D pixelated art style still works in this modern era of gaming and can be done in a magnificent fashion. Those games look absolutely fantastic and they ooze style, and I would be very curious to see what Pokemon could do with this art style in this modern era. So yeah, especially with the aforementioned Sinnoh remakes, having this semi-return to the original art style, basically trying to emulate how this mostly 2D environment with some 3D assets was adapted to this chibi style, felt like somewhat of a half commitment to it for me. But it's like we kind of want to go back to how the games look, but we want to maintain the 3D animations and renders that have been built up over the course of like the last 11 years. But I think I and a lot of the older fans would really appreciate that return to form with the 2D sprites, and honestly just introduce a whole new generation of gamers to the beauty of those sprites, because there's nothing wrong or inferior about those 2D artworks, and just thinking about it boils my curiosity. And thinking about all of those things, it's not just the Unova games that are greatly benefit from a potential sequel, because thinking about the Kalos games, thinking about X and Y, it always felt like those games were so severely lacking from a definitive edition, since it went from X and Y to Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire to the next generation games. It seems like now would be a good time to just invest into the future with those sequels and establish something that would further explore on primarily Zygarde. The 100% Zygarde form, to me it always felt like with the lack of a Pokemon Z, if it wouldn't have been for the anime teasing at those complete form, I don't think the games would have really used it at this point, because in the Sun and Moon games where this complete form of this Kalos Pokemon was first shown, it just felt tacked on. I don't know if that's just me, but it felt tacked on, where they were just like, okay, yeah, we have to have these Zygarde cells, find them, no real point in explaining it further. So a sequel game where those consequences have been dealt with, and a further exploration of Zygarde's role as a protector of the ecosystem in a time of need would just be, it just too enticing to ignore it. In addition to, for example, the power plants that were closed off. Always felt like they were waiting for a mystery event just to happen, to give us an entrance key. And there's so many more small little things where it's just such a shame to not use the opportunity of returning to this region to just further flesh out the world building and the lore of those respective places in the Pokemon world, without having to be restrained by the re-established story and setting that a original version would dictate from a remake in the style of Pokemon. So just not have any original games at all isn't really a solution to me. And the last point I want to make in this is that I'd much rather see direct ports. In addition to all the Unova speculation, be it a remake or a sequel or a Legends game, there's just not really a need to reinvent those games, because Pokemon games have aged rather well in my opinion. Just port them to the modern consoles and people would rejoice. If anything, maybe the 3DS games, you can argue an HD remake to just upscale the resolution would be all they need, since they wouldn't look all that different from what the current style is. It feels like, especially with the 3DS games, the art style has just matured, but the basic idea is the same, so it would just feel like a waste of opportunity to not just leave the game as is and elaborate on the already existing world with more games that aren't set in the same place in the same timeline with the same people, and instead just make the world of Pokemon bigger and richer and more detailed. Especially with Pokemon Bank shutting down soon, it would be a nice opportunity to do it like in the 3DS era with the ports of the first and second generation games, to be able to just play them on the Switch, catch them and transfer them to Pokemon Home to get them to any game you want, really. And yeah, those are basically the points I wanted to make. The story, the art style, the future opportunity to flesh out those games that really need it is all I really hope. Like, I dearly adore the Pokemon franchise as a whole, but I will not make a secret out of the fact that I haven't been particularly happy with the direction that the franchise took throughout the last couple of years, and no matter what we get for this Pokemon Day, I genuinely hope that it brings back some of the magic that made me fall in love with this franchise initially. And with that, if you have been watching up till this point, I appreciate you. Maybe hit the like and subscribe button, because I want to make a lot more stuff in the future. But yeah, until the next video, I hope you stay well. I hope to see you again soon. But I'm Casey, and I'm out for now. Cheerio!